We are eager to hear your ideas. So Andrea, our senior at UNCC and co-chair of the student chapter there, will now be assigning breakout groups and will share the discussion questions.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Denise, and of course the speakers as well. So for this section, I believe that everyone that doesn't want to be part of a breakout room can just log off. And then I will assign the people that are remaining. And each moderator should have received a message with their 2 questions and what group number they are going to be. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to separate everyone into 6 groups. And then within your group, you're going to discuss the 2 questions that are assigned. But I will read out all 3 now, just so that you can start thinking about it. So the first question is, how do you ensure that people of color are not institutional window dressing and instead viable contributors? The second question will be, how does thinking have to change to ensure that once a person of color becomes part of an organization or advocacy group, that they can openly contribute and add value and benefit of their culture to it? And then lastly, and this question will be one that each group will discuss, what actions are you going to take to be anti-racist and to advance Medicare for all?
And elementary school is very important to work on this humility. And by the way, my name is Zara, and I am a assistant professor in Queen's University teaching biology.
Yes, so James, Zara is actually our faculty advisor, so we know each other pretty well. But definitely, I think, like you said, it's a lot easier to build up the sense of humility and allowing for inclusivity within these spaces when you learn that from a young age. But it's also difficult to kind of foster that same thing within these more well-established organizations. And I think that's definitely something that we have to do with even the Medicare for All movement and our group as well, trying to make sure that we're continuing to reconsider the ways that we communicate with each other and continue to make sure that we are bringing people to the forefront that we might not usually do. And so I think that's great that we're having this conversation in the first place. Do you think that this is something that can be incorporated? I guess we can move on to question 2 in that sense. Like what ways can we incorporate that into our own discussions and conversations and movement? Specifically, let's say within Healthcare Justice North Carolina, but also outside of that within our other organizations.
I think the very first step is one that not only like in healthcare justice, but just in society in general here in the US, especially after the racial justice movement earlier last year, is what Dr. Sachs said about just naming it. I think that one of like the very first step to not just be like non-racist, but actually be anti-racist is to name the racism and name it in all of these different dimensions. And so like, obviously in terms of the racial justice movements that kind of sparked this all, it started out with police brutality, but then you can see that all of these other kind of subdivisions of this movement arose in all of the different sectors of society where we see racism, because it is in every sector of society. And I love how there's a bunch of, for example, people in the medical force and in the healthcare force, like medical schools sending out statements and things of that nature and adding it to the curriculum. And I think that's the very first step that we as individuals need to take, is just start naming them and start talking about them in everyday discussions as well.
My name is Larry Jones. I'm a retired pediatrician, and I've been a healthcare administrator in a couple of insurance companies, as well as administrator on the hospital side. So from my perspective, and having gone through the whole medical journey, the level of racism within the system is undoubted at every level. The only way that that's going to really change such that there's less racism in the system is to really take a close internal look at the structure within that whole medical community. As it currently stands, it's very difficult to buck that system. And I mean, it's great that some medical schools are sending out policy statements, but that really doesn't do much. I went to Johns Hopkins, and I don't know about the other medical schools, but it was an extremely racist institution, to the point that there were professors who said there would never be a Black student as long as they were alive, and there wasn't. I came after he died, and that was Blaylock. If any physicians who know who Alfred Blaylock was as a surgeon. So to break down those kinds of structural, and that is a very structured racist type of system, is going to take a lot of time and a lot of effort. It's going to take really starting, even if you're starting just with medical students, it's going to take starting with them when they enter the door. If you're really serious about making any dent in the level of racism, that if they didn't already know it, they will learn going through the process of becoming a physician. So until they really begin to teach medical students how to be culturally humble, or in general, just to be humble, to value your patient's opinions and to accept them as fact rather than to discount them and to ignore them, which is very typical, it's going to take a while to make that kind of a dent. And I really would like to see any medical school who really puts this at the forefront of their training. I'd like to be, I'd like to know more about it and like to be a part of it. So if anybody knows of one,
Yeah,
please share.
I love that you bring that up, and that's definitely something that. So I didn't introduce myself. I'm Andrea, and both Chiamaka and I are currently applying to medical school. And so we've been actually, both of us have been really purposefully looking at the way that the different institutions that we apply to are talking about these issues and how they are incorporating it like purposely, like you say, and not just having it in their mission statement or just sending out a statement and that's it. And I can say that I share like the frustration with you, because you'd think that at this point every school would include this in their curriculum and it would be such a forefront for every school, but it
No.
isn't at all. And but on the bright side, there are some schools that are being really purposeful of it. And I know that Chimaka and I can both agree that one of those is U
Good,
Chicago.
good. Oh,
And U
wonderful.
Chicago, yeah. U Chicago has obviously historically been very racist, and they know that they have a lot of work to do. But what I think, and I'm sorry if I'm speaking for both of us now, but at least what I find impressive is that they're really transparent about it. And not only that, but they include a lot of classes in their like curriculum about healthcare disparities, about health inequity. And not only that, but the very first class that you take as your first year, right before you start anatomy and all the basic core sciences, is a class specific and solely about healthcare disparities. So that's one example of a school that I think very purposefully engages with the community with this health equity in mind and with this anti-racism kind of approach. But I will say that I share your frustration, and that is definitely not the case at all schools.
I'm really happy to hear that, because the Dean of Diversity and Inclusion at the University of Chicago is a personal friend of mine, somebody that I trained with. She was a nurse when I was training as a resident.
What's her name?
What's the name?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Brenda Battle.
Oh, that's
I don't think I
awesome.
met her. Very
Yeah.
cool. I was also going to say, thank you so much for sharing, Dr. Jones. I was going to say that your comment was interesting because we both were considering Johns Hopkins, and definitely that's something that we will take in mind, trying to consider some of the history of these schools as well, and continuing to ask those questions as to what is being done that can be done better institutionally. So thank you for saying that.
And I'm gonna pop off really quick to send a broadcast message to everyone, but please continue your discussion.
Thank you, Andrea.
Now we're just gonna have each moderator from the breakout room just briefly summarize what you talked about, or what was the most important point that you think your group made. Just in under a minute, a quick little summary. So can we have group 1%? I believe that's Irene.
So Andrea, I had a great discussion with Dr. Denise, Christian, Bruce, and Carrie. And our first question was, how do you ensure POC, people of color, aren't just institutional window dressing? And we said it's important to not just have people of color be tokens for your company, but to ask them how we can assist and ask people of color what they want to see happen, what change they want, and to not just listen, but also understand where that perspective comes from. Look at cultural and generational differences, because not every generation may want to contribute, and also look at how business models are adapting. And then our second question was, what actions are you going to do to be anti-racist? And we said it's important to reach out to different communities and provide opportunities. We talked about how Charlotte still has a lot of work to do. And we mentioned how you can take action by volunteering and actually going over and taking action with different communities and different communities of color.
Great, thank you, Irene. Now for group 2, I believe that's Dimple.
Yes, hi. In my group, we had George and Evelyn, and I can't remember the other person's name, and I don't think she's here.
It was me.
Oh, wait.
Jackie.
Yes.
Jackie.
Oh, there you are, Jackie. I didn't see you on my screen. Yeah, and Jackie. Our first question, how do you ensure that people of color are not institutional window dressing and instead viable contributors, so that they're not just an institution that's truly diverse and not just person of color there as proof? And we discussed how having something similar to what Stacey Abrams did in Georgia, just a lot of education, having people around people of color that they trust, people that look like them, training people of other people of color to reach others in their own communities, and that the onus is on the white people to recruit people of color, not just wait for people of color to just show up. So it's important for Caucasians to take some ownership and let go of some of that control and give it back to people of color. The second question was the same that everyone else got. Actions you're going to take to be anti-racist and advance Medicare for all. A lot of it had to do with, well, race is not a party issue like Republican or Democrat. It's a white people issue, and we need to tackle it that way. And education is a big thing, letting people know it's also not a racial issue. It's poor people too that need to, that will benefit from Medicare for all, and that educating people that they have nothing to lose but everything to gain from the system, and getting others to trust the process and trust that it would work. So
Thank you so much, Dimple. No, that was perfect. So our third group was Andrea.
Hey everybody, so Joanne, Jessica, Kim, and Julie, we all discussed the various topics. One thing that I think kind of resonated with me was sort of this common courtesy to everyone, and just this thought that going out of your way to be friendly to other folks, even if they're not being friendly to you, regardless of age or race or whatever, is really important so that people feel welcome. We talked about the culture of an administrative hierarchy and how important it is for them, for administrators to hear the voices of the folks that work for them. Perspective from all areas of the business, whether it's the janitor or the chef or the physician, the nurse, the physical therapist, the orderly, no matter what, it's important to hear from them how to fix healthcare as well, or in any company really, so that we not only honor the mission, but also the needs of a culturally diverse community. In terms of what can we do as individuals, we kind of ran out of time, but basically that we're going to keep involved, we're going to keep reading. I'm going to personally keep examining my own sort of white privilege and involve myself a little bit more on actual anti-racism type activities and groups. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrea. So for group number 4, we had Shami.
Hey, so my group was Margie, Nazim, Michael, and Mary, and we addressed that second question of how's our thinking need to change to ensure that people of color and organizations can openly contribute and add their benefit. So some of the things we discussed was also looking at leadership structure and making sure that the leadership reflects the membership of the groups and also the community at large as well, and ensuring that people of color are represented in leadership. We discussed just having active and open and curious listening with one another, and also kind of recognizing and valuing our differences and using that as a strength. We also discussed actively encouraging participants or participation from everybody in groups and organizations, and creating opportunities for people to shine and show their strengths or use their strengths, and really valuing what everyone brings to the table. And then in terms of specific actions, we discussed educating ourselves and those around us about real history with regards to both healthcare and with regards to racial inequalities, and sharing information with friends, colleagues, whomever we're around, using social media as a valuable tool to share information. We talked about how there's probably a lot of people out there that have similar goals with regards to some of these issues we're talking about, but don't really know what they can do. And then we even discussed, the thought of having some kind of political action committee that was not nonpartisan, but issue-based, and even maybe having, ads and things like that that could get out to the larger community.
Thank you for sharing, Shami. For our group number 5, we had John.
Thanks. Susan, Megan, Royce, Ron and I had a good discussion. It started with Susan, who's a Medicare recipient and very unhappy with current Medicare and wants to change it yesterday. We had 2 questions to consider, the second and third, regarding engaging persons of color in openly contributing to the benefit of their culture. It was suggested that we solicit stories from communities like Enderley Park and Brook Hill of people who have been impacted by the racist healthcare policies manifested, today as exhibited by the Charlotte Observer and the maldistribution of the vaccine, not going to those who need it the most. With regard to question number 3, it was suggested that we educate ourselves. We have our history is worse than prostituted. It does not reflect Black history since 1619. And we need to be able to understand Black history, to listen. And in terms of action, while individuals make decisions, we have to motivate individuals to make the right decisions.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And then last but not least, we have group number 6, which was Chiamaka.
Hi, everyone. Yes, so I had a great conversation with Dr. James and Dr. Larry, and Zara and Andrea popped in for a little bit as well. So we had a conversation about the second 2 questions, which involved how to ensure that people of color become as a part of the culture of an organization, and then also, of course, the anti-racist question. So something that was mentioned was humility and making sure that we are inviting people into these spaces, making sure that we're humble about inviting people into these spaces and actually taking a step back when we want to talk and have time and space for people to voice their own perspectives and opinions. So that's something that really came out of our conversation. Additionally, we talked a little bit more when we were speaking towards the second question about the changes that need to be made structurally. We spoke more so about medical institutions because we do know that healthcare providers are key players in the way that our healthcare is run, but also, this can be translated to any other organization in the sense of not only having people of color and Black people as, figures within your organization, but actually incorporating their ideas and perspectives into the actual institution itself. And so making sure that that's occurring in these institutions, especially those that have such influence over healthcare and health related decisions. And also talking about the history of that and saying that history does matter regardless, and that we need to talk about the history. Regardless of what an institution is doing now, we need to be open with what has happened in the past. And so I think that moving forward, our group was kind of able to say that overall inclusivity stems from these structural changes and then can also be impacted by individual movements, but we do need that to happen from a structural institutional level as well.
Thank you so much, Chiamaka. Thank you to everyone who contributed, and I hope you all enjoyed your individual discussions.